Brenden, welcome to the Easy Conversations podcast. Thank you for joining me today and taking the time to do this. I'm really excited to learn about your journey and also have some practical takeaways from the conversation that hopefully we can share with the listeners as well today. But I think one of the things I gathered in our previous discussion was communication, right? And some of the things you shared really hit home for me. And I think it's important to talk about these things because it's not a tool that we spend a lot of time focusing on, but it's part of our day-to-day life, every interaction. And so many of us struggle with this piece that we often take for granted. So I'm sure we'll get into that. But before we dive into our conversation, I do want to give you an opportunity to share with the listeners a little bit about yourself and what's brought you here.
Yeah, for sure, Furkhan. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I know long overdue, but glad we can make this happen. It's great to connect with you. I think you're a fellow Canadian as well, right? If
Yeah,
I'm
I
not.
actually am from Montreal as well. So I grew
Oh,
up.
do you live in Montreal
No,
currently?
I live in Calgary now, but I
Oh, yeah,
grew up there. Yeah, yeah,
that's great.
yeah,
Yeah, I love Montreal. Never left the city. I travel a lot more now for work, but
yeah.
I always come back home to Montreal. So that's great, man. Yeah, so communication. So what I do really quick is I help other people how to communicate ideas. Most of my clients are typically like execs and CEOs. And I
Hmm.
also create a lot of communication content around public speaking for free.
Yeah.
And you're definitely right, Furkan, about the point that you drove around. Communication is this topic that a lot of us, frankly, don't really talk about. And I think the reason is because, well, two. The first one is we're either too scared to
Hmm.
talk about it because we don't see a solution to it, especially in the context of giving, let's say, a presentation at work. We go like, oh, there's no way to fix this. I'm just scared and I don't want to get any better.
Hmm.
And the other reason is probably that some of us might think we already know how to communicate. Well, I'm talking to my wife all the time. For
Yeah.
Ken, I'm talking to the people in my life all the time. Why do I need to get better at communication? I already
Hmm.
speak English or whatever language that I speak. So that's
Hmm.
probably the other vantage point as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what got you into this space? Because I know one of the other things we talked about was you're relatively younger, right? So how are you then in a position to help others that have been perhaps in their field of work for decades, helping them communicate, right? So, what are some of the things that you've grasped over your lifetime that you feel you're able to then share with others? So, what got you into this, and how are you then providing value from your perspective?
Yeah, for sure, for a kid. Happy to talk about that. So yeah, so since you grew up in Montreal, you know the schools pretty well. So I'll give you less context.
Hmm.
So I went to accounting at Concordia University in Montreal, and my goal was to never become a coach. I wasn't looking. I didn't know there's a profession. I wasn't looking to do this in business. I didn't even like speaking growing up
Hmm.
for again, because as you know, once again, since you lived in Montreal, for the audience who might not know, Montreal's a city where you need to know how to speak French,
Hmm.
and it's a language I did not know. So my parents sent me to French school, which is why I'm trilingual today. But the challenge that I had growing up as a kid was I had to always present in a language I didn't know. And
Hmm.
that always caused a lot of anxiety and stress around speaking. So the communication was the last thing that I wanted to do in my life. I went through enough. I finally got to switch out of French and go into an English curriculum.
Hmm.
Super grateful for learning French though, but like grateful to be at Concordia and stuff. And I just wanted to get an accounting degree. But then what started to happen for Ken is I started doing these things called Think of it like professional sports for nerds. So while other guys my age, yeah, that's the only way to explain it. While other guys my age were playing like football or rugby or tennis or some other sport you wouldn't see me playing, I did presentations competitively. And I did them competitively was to get a job at one of the big four accounting firms. And I got an internship at PwC probably like in my second year of accounting. And then after that, I realized that I really, really liked case competitions, that I'm really, really competitive. So I just started coaching a lot of the students back then. That's how I started coaching when I was 19. So I've been doing this for almost 10 years now, which is pretty crazy. I'm
Yeah.
getting old now. So the idea is, dude, you think I'm young? I remember when I started guesting on shows and I was 22. Imagine. At least now I have a lot of executive clients and like a lot of credibility and
Yeah.
all that stuff. Whereas back then it was even worse. So I started coaching all these people for free. I didn't know coaching was a profession, Furkhan. And then to make a long story short, when I was 22, I had the idea to start making YouTube videos on public speaking for the simple reason that I felt when I started watching YouTube videos on the subject that a lot of people who were speaking on the topic didn't really have any experience directly coaching people. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Who are people I now respect who are colleagues in my field now, but it wasn't the case at the beginning, where I would see this guy with like a PhD in communication and they would talk about communication and then I'd listen and be like, yeah, but that doesn't work. I was like, because they're like a faculty professor at a university. So I'd be like, yeah, I know you did your dissertation on this and you have a PhD in this topic, but that's not going to get clients to like speak better. Whereas I coached Johnny yesterday and this is what I did. Why didn't what I taught Johnny, why isn't this taught in any of the videos? So the main idea, and I'll throw it back to you, is the differentiation here was simplicity, practicality, and sequencing. The first one is simplicity. Make the advice simple. We all know what the advice is in fitness. Walk every day. Go to the gym. Get a workout in. Eat healthier. We don't have that in communication. Number 2 is practicality. All of the exercises I'll be sharing today, Furkhan, you can do. You can take and run with. It's tangible. It's not like I want you to look inside your heart and pray for a better future. I mean, do that. It's cool, but amazing. Do that. It's something I do that all the time, but that doesn't make you a better communicator. And then the third one is the most important one, sequencing. What is the right sequence and how one should tackle exercises? So when I teach an exercise today, do it and then go to the next one. And I think the reason why the C-level have trusted me really quickly, well, I think the first reason is because a lot of my first C-level clients were my age, because a lot of the younger guys were starting tech companies, right? This just happened to be my friends. So I learned C-level languaging pretty early and I was able to mature in the field later on.
No, thank you for that. I appreciate you walking us through that. So there's a couple of things you touched on earlier that I want to explore a bit further, and then we'll come back to some of the tangible, practical things also. But you talked about language, right? And I'm really fascinated by language because obviously it's evolved for us to be able to communicate, which is what we're talking about today. But do you feel like having to learn 3 languages and then also touching on the case competition piece there where you're having to think on your feet, and especially if you're trying to think, like we all have a language we think in, right? Our default go-to. And then often, especially if we're speaking in another language, I know for me, I'm thinking in English, but then I'm translating it and trying to explain my way. And then I think even with my experience with case competitions is you're obviously solving a problem, but you don't know what kind of questions you're going to have to field. So you have to think on your feet. Do you feel that's a huge component of communication? And is that something that's helped you build some of the skills that you're using now?
Absolutely, Furkhan. It seems by your communication that you actually know what a case competition is. Do you have experience around that? Like, have you seen?
Yes, I have an MBA, and so I did that, and then I also did some in engineering, like case competitions. Yeah, so I have a bit of experience. Yeah,
that's very cool. So just for the audience, for people listening, that's very rare. So most of you who are listening to the show probably have no idea what me and Furkhan are talking about. Like, what in the world is a case competition? Which I'm not used to. I'm not used to an interview who actually has the full context of what a case competition, all this stuff. So basically, what it is for the audience is, think of it like, exactly like Furkhan says. Nike comes up to us and says, Furkhan, Brenden, I have a problem. I have $1 million and I need to open a store, but I don't know if I should open in Atlanta, Georgia or Barcelona, Spain. Where should I open the store and why? Because I only have funding for one. And then what we do is we spend 3 hours looking through a 20-page document, coming up with solutions, and then communicating that to a board who are often the executives of the company, which begs the next question. Why do case competitions exist? Very simple. They're a great recruitment tool for fresh blood. That's basically what this is. So Nike will spend Walmart will spend $10,000-$15,000 sponsoring a case. They'll bring their executives in. They'll listen to all the students, and the ones that they like, they'll go up to them and say like, "Hey, you should interview for this job." And that's actually how he got placed at PricewaterhouseCoopers and then later on at IBM. It's because of these cases. So to bring it back to your point, you know this, but for the audience, case competitions were essential to me understanding what executives and how executives think, act, and feel like. Because a lot of my mentors, even if I was relatively young, were SVPs at Bombardier, were vice presidents at Goldman Sachs. They were big people who had been in the program 10 years ago and ascended in their career really quickly. So whenever I'm practicing, it wasn't like some hocus pocus magic trick where I would present, they would all just clap for me. Like my coaching sessions were brutal for like I was this 20-year-old kid with an oversized suit. I'd give a presentation and the guy would just look at me and go like, did I seriously just waste my evening spending it with you and I could be having dinner with my family right now? Like it was really intense. So I learned the languaging of executives and how they think really quickly. And I think that's why I was able to build trust with the C-level pretty quickly. That's one piece. And then the other piece that you asked that was really cool is around languages. Yeah, I would say for me, Furkhan, learning multiple languages for me has helped a lot, but more from the vantage point of understanding the people that I work with and my audience. Yes, my pronunciation has improved a lot. Yes, there's a lot of phonetics you can learn when you switch languages a lot. But I think the main thing is I just understand what my clients are going through and the people that watch my free content are going through. So now when like a Chinese immigrant comes to the US, I don't come from the vantage point of like, oh, like you just have to fix this. I start from a place of empathy. Oh, I was that guy too. It's just my second language wasn't English, it was French. And I'm like, this is how you actually solve the problem. We can talk about that during the podcast if you want. But I think that place of empathy has really helped me broaden my audience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge component, is being able to understand. And a lot of the times we're not really focusing on that when we're trying to communicate. And a lot of times people end up falling into the trap, especially when they're trying to communicate with their significant other or coworkers. They're not really putting themselves in this shared understanding of the other person's experience. And we're all focused on what we want to get across, right? And this is why I was drawing that parallel with language also, but case competitions, because you touched on it there, but you're taking a large amount of information and you're having to synthesize it so then the other person can understand what you're saying, right? And then there's two components to what I really appreciated was the storytelling aspect, which evokes emotion and gets the other person engaged. But then you're also relaying a message in terms of what's in it for you. So I think those are important components of communication from my perspective that we don't necessarily take into account, is how am I sharing something engaging, but then how am I also taking the other person's view into consideration so they feel like they need to pay attention to this. So I don't know if those things align with you as well.
Absolutely, they do. Yeah, I think you brought up a lot of great points there, Furkhan, especially around alignment and relationships and storytelling. I think for me, the only lining thread I would add to your great share there is that's really been the consistent challenge I've seen with communication or conversations around this topic, is there's no level of practicality. Like, let's say we think about like storytelling. Dude, it's so hard to teach storytelling to people. Like we talk about it, but then you're like, how do you work on it? So I've had to really work my brain because I just couldn't find an answer from other coaches. So I was just, or thought leaders in the subject. So I was like, this is what you need to do. Same thing with relationships. Relationships are so murky. They're so difficult. We all struggle with our romantic relationship, whether you're single or you're in a relationship, doesn't matter. It's all complicated. So for me, it's all about saying, and I'll give one really quick, but obviously I'm happy to share more.
Yeah.
It's like, instead of us thinking about, okay, we got to listen more, we got to talk more, no one's going to implement anything from that. They're just going to go like, oh, okay, like I'll do that more. Then there's no tangible change. Versus like what I get my clients to do, which may or may not have anything to do with communication. That's up for the viewer to decide. But I'll say something to a guy like a guy who's married, which is most of my clients probably, is I'll say, hey, take a piece of paper out and just laundry list. I literally say it this way: laundry list 25 things you really love about your wife and just give her the letter. That's it. So from a man's perspective, this is actually really easy. So if you tell a man, hey, write a love letter for your wife, they get stuck because they have no idea what to do. They're like, what is this? Like, how do I write a love letter? Like, I'm not really sure. And then they kind of don't do it. Whereas if we go like, what's 25 things you really love about your life? It's literally like a grocery list. They go like, these are 25 things. It's easy. The task is complete. There's a checkbox, but it gets received in the feminine. So when you give that letter, you're thinking it's not a big deal. And then, dude, this has happened like 100% of the time. Like, the women just start weeping. They're going like, oh my God, this is so meaningful to me.
Hmm.
So the way that we improve relationships is like that, by having easy wins that we can measure ourselves against and celebrate, or else it just becomes this dreary muck of goo that nobody wants to get better at.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So I know we're going to talk about some practical things that people can take away, but from your perspective, where are some areas, and I know you've already touched on a few, but where are some areas people get tripped up when it comes to communication? Why is it such a scary thing for people? Why is it something, to your point earlier, we've created this narrative in our mind that it's, or we've told ourselves that, yeah, I'm okay with it. But where do people often get tripped up when it comes to this piece?
Yeah, absolutely, Furkhan. You have two great questions there. One is around the origin story,
Yeah.
around where does public speaking fear come from? Why does it exist? And the second one is just around day-to-day challenges.
Yeah.
So let's tackle both. So the first one is around the origin. You know, it's funny. If you had asked me this question 6-7 years ago, I wouldn't be able to give a good answer. But I think now, which is really where a lot of my work comes from, it's not academic. I let the academics do their work, and they do incredible work. But my side of the game is really about using anecdotal evidence that I think will be more relatable to people. And that's really the frame that I come from in the work that I do. So let's go through that example. Let's think about it for a second. If we look at our lives as human beings, what is the first instance of our lives where we have to give formal presentations? And for most of us, you probably already know the answer: school, right? Elementary school, high school, etc. And what's fascinating about school to me is that every presentation you give in school, which is your first kind of real game of speaking, has three fundamental problems that is not fixed in the education system. And whether you live in India, whether you live in Pakistan, whether you live in the United States, whether you live in the UK and London, doesn't matter. It's the same. You deliver in your teen years are all mandatory. You don't wake up one morning and say, hey, Furkhan, you want to get breakfast and present all day? Nobody says that.
Yeah.
Communication is something that you have to do. And whenever we're forced to do something versus something like sports or ballet, right? It's like, oh, like I get to do sports. No, I want to play baseball. So there's a desire, there's a motivation. Same thing with women. I mean, it could be vice versa, right? I want to do dancing, I want to do ballet, guy or girl, it doesn't matter. I really want to do this, Dad. I really want to do this, Mom. So that incentive does not exist. That's number one. Every presentation is mandatory. Number two, all the presentations you deliver, probably 99%, I can't say 100% anymore, but like most of the time, are always to topics you never get to pick. So it's never, hey, Furkhan, what are you passionate about? I see you're a very stylish guy. Do you want to talk about style? I like your hat. I see you got an MLB hat on. Maybe you like talking about baseball, right? World map geography. Is that what you want to present? No, that's not how you get trained in the education system. What happens is, Furkhan, you have to talk about Shakespearean poetry. You don't have a choice, right? That's what you have to do. And that's what students are forced to do in science, in geography, in history. Who wants to talk about Renaissance? Like, it's just nonsense. And then the third fundamental problem, and this is the biggest of the three, and it is the main reason we're all stuck in speaking, which is every single presentation we give is tied to a punishment. Every single one of them. The reward system is completely broken, where every single time you give a presentation, hey, by the way, Furkhan, if you mess this up, just letting you know, your chance of getting to your dream college are going down the drain. Your parents are going to be really mad at you. You're probably going to get slapped in the face if you're an immigrant kid, right? So it's tied to a punishment. Yeah, so bringing it back to the punishment part, Furkhan, the challenge is that a lot of us, because of the reward system is so broken in public speaking, whenever we're thinking about presentations, it's never, hey, you get to do this, but rather the opposite. Hey, by the way, if you don't do this, your dream of going to college, your dream of getting to the next level, your dream of not disappointing your parents and making them proud of you all go down the drain. So let's summarize all of this. 100% of all of our presentations are mandatory. They're to topics we don't even want to present, and they're all tied to a punishment. So what do we learn? We learn that communication is a chore. And that's what we grow up believing as we get older, and nobody wants to get better at doing the dishes.
No, I appreciate that. So I think what you touched on there from a behavioral perspective is the punishment, as you touched on. So unfortunately, very early on, most people are developing an aversion to public speaking or communication, because now you've tied this behavior or this activity to a punishment. So immediately the circuitry in your brain is just trying to avoid it, because as humans, we try to avoid pain and seek out pleasure. So if we were to make this activity of public speaking or communication more enjoyable for individuals early on, then it's something that we could pursue. And to your point, it's not something a lot of people are asking for in comparison to like going and playing sports or another hobby. It's very rare that you hear kids saying, "Hey, I want to get into public speaking." So I can see that aspect. Now, is there another element here just around communication? Because we're, I wouldn't say poor, but most people, like even our caretakers, our parents, our teachers, often people around us, it's not something they've worked on. So we're not really getting the best models around us to be able to learn how to communicate, because everyone's struggling in it. Do you think that also factors in, because we're just not paying a lot of attention to it? So then when we become adults, it's just a skill we haven't really spent time working on.
Yeah, and I think an easy way to explain this to folks, which you pretty much nailed the head on the nail here, is how we parent our own children, right? So in the context of fathering and mothering the next generation of people, we often model the behaviors of our, or the ways that our parents interact, and that is what we believe to be normal and not necessarily the ideal way of saying things. So one example in parenting is PDAs, right? Public displays of affection. So like in Indian culture, right, which you probably know a little bit about, right? Like Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, or really Asian culture in general, parents are not really expected to hold each other's hands or show any love to each other. So when the next generation gets into relationships, we see those PDAs as weird. We're going, oh, and that's a bad behavior that we've learned, because no, you want to show like real example of your kids, because I literally don't have a family, including my own parents, if I'm being honest, of a good example of how like people should treat each other in a relationship. So I had to go find my own models and create something from scratch. But you're right, for most of us, we follow the wrong model. So obviously I'm not parenting, I so bringing this back to communication, it's the same game, right? Which is why I believe you're correct, where we're looking and modeling off of everyone around us. But since everyone is not really spending that much time trying to be an exceptional communicator or being better at speaking, of course, naturally, it doesn't become a priority for us.
Yeah, for sure. So now let's maybe jump into what are some things people can do. I know you touched on the simplicity, the practicality, and the sequencing. Do you think we can jump into that a little bit further and get into some of the details? I'll let you take it as you want to go, and then I'll definitely ask questions along the way, depending on what I want to explore further. But let's just maybe get into that and help us understand what are these things that we can focus on that can help us building that muscle and improving our ability to speak in public.
Yeah, absolutely, Furkhan. So what I'll do is I'll explain the context first, and then we'll tackle each extras at a time, and I'll take pauses in between.
Sure.
So communication is like juggling 18 balls at the same time for a character, where one of them is storytelling, one of them is pacing, one of them is body language, one of them is opening your eyes more, one of them is smiling more, and this facial expressions. And that's what leads to a lot of confusion when someone wants to work on the skill, because they don't know what to focus on, and it's really hard to see progress and momentum in the skill set. For example, if I'm trying to do a weight loss goal and I lose 2 pounds after a week, now there's momentum, which then begets more momentum. Oh, okay, I lost 2 pounds this week by working out 4 times a week. Holy moly, guacamole, let me work out 4 times a week every single week. Whereas in communication, that reward system is not as clear. So a part of my job and part of my thought leadership, a big part, is how do we create a reward system for people? So let's dive into what that looks like.
Sure.
Which is essentially what we'll answer today. What are the 3 easiest balls to juggle? Out of the 18, what are the 3 easiest ones that if you got started, you can see results quickly and move really quickly at it? Really simple. And I call it RQV. RQV. Let's start with R, the random word exercise. Pick any word that you want: phone, xylophone, renovations, because the renovations at my house right now, styrofoam, wood, hoodie, something completely random that has nothing to do with your expertise, and give a 60-second to 2-minute presentation on that topic with zero prep. What's the benefit? The benefit is really simple. If you could make sense out of nonsense, Furkhan, you can make sense out of anything. So if you talk about tissue boxes and MLB and geography and the world map and anime and mangoes, when you go back to your expertise, it's really easy for you to communicate those ideas. So even for my I don't care if you're a 5-year-old girl or a $10 million CEO, everyone has to do 100 random word exercises. And I've never met one person who has came up to me, Furkhan, and said, Brenden, I did 100 random word exercises, and I feel like I'm a lot worse at communication now. No one's ever said that. So that's exercise number 1.
Yeah, and that's great. And I think that goes back to what we were talking about earlier with the case competitions, like having to think on your feet, right? So you're almost training your brain to be able to take one word and create a story with it, or something that's compelling and engaging. So I think that's really important because, again, it's all about training yourself. So I do appreciate that exercise because it is definitely helpful.
Absolutely, Furkhan. And that's really the key to your point. A lot of people, and that's what I learned from case competitions. My training was built in my life, but for most people, like, they'll never do case competitions or debates or model UN. So they have to create other ways of adding this in. But the key point that you touched on slightly in this podcast in a really good way is the idea of fun. How do you make this more playful? So what I ever encourage people to do is, don't make this intimidating. Do the random word exercise with your kids. Do that with your nieces, your nephews, your best friends at a Toastmaster club. Just do this with people in your life. And if you build that muscle like you do with doing push-ups or sit-ups consistently over time, I think you'll be in a really good spot. That's exercise 1. Let's go to exercise 2. The question drill. We get asked questions all the time in our lives, Furkhan. All the time. But most of us are not prepared for the question that life has in store for us. And it's funny, you actually asked me a question that I got that triggered this exercise. So a few years ago, this is a long time ago now, probably 7 years ago, when I started guesting on podcasts, I was obviously very shy. I didn't really know how to be on the show. I didn't know how to be interviewed because I didn't expect people to want to interview me. So I remember I got on this guy's show and he asked me the question you asked me, which was, where does the fear of communication come from? And I didn't know the answer because I didn't have the expertise I have now. So I was like, I don't know, man. Dubai, Florida, like, that's where it comes from. You tell me. So I wasn't sure what the answer was, and I was really mad at myself because I said, man, if people are already gonna be telling me that I'm young, I better be better than every other communication coach that ever gets interviewed on podcasts in the world. So what I did is 2 things. 1, I challenged myself to be interviewed a lot. I've been interviewed over 500 times. Like the first 5, I don't do it as much anymore, but like the first 500, I got on any show. I don't care if it's a weed show, a sports show, just to practice answering questions. But the other thing that I did, which can be applied to everyone, because I know not everyone is going to be guesting on podcasts anytime soon, which is every single day, Furkhan, I answered one question about my expertise. That's it. That's all I did. So one day was, hey, Brenden, what tips do you have for introverts on speaking? Day 2 was, what's your vision for MasterTalk? Day 3 was, what are some body language tips? But if you do this every single day for 365 days for a year, you'll have answered 365 questions about your expertise, and you'll be absolutely bulletproof. It's a very simple exercise that nobody does. And the way you can apply this is really simple. One is the podcast frame that we already talked about. We listen to your podcast, but I'll acknowledge most people are probably not guesting on shows. So let me give the 2 other frames. Second frame is job interviews. Duh. We're all being interviewed for jobs all the time. Right? So are we preparing for those questions, or are we waiting for the question to come up for the first time in an interview and going, oh, yeah, look, I probably should have thought about that. Yeah, that's why you need to practice. And then number 3, so every day is tell me about yourself. Every day is why should we hire you? Every day is tell me a time where you led a team and executed a project. If you do that once a day, every day, you can never lose interviews. It's impossible. You're just doing more work than everyone else for free. It doesn't cost you anything. And then the other frame is, if you're an entrepreneur, obviously, It's sales calls. Sales calls. Re-listen to a call that you had this week. Write down every question the prospect asked you. Grab your favorite cup of orange juice, sit at a balcony, and just go, okay, if I had to answer this question again, how would I answer it better? And just that mental framework helps. And I'll give you one last scenario, which is people who don't want to quit their jobs and want to stay in their companies. Just make a list of every question your boss's boss asked you in the last month that really scared you. Go rewatch the recording of the most stressful meeting you had this month that made you want to pee in your pants. Go re-listen to that recording. Write down every question you got asked and just ask yourself, how could I answer this better?
Right.
And that's how you improve your skill set. That's number 2.
Yeah, no, again, it's one of those things. What I'm hearing there is you really want to put yourself out of your comfort zone. Otherwise, you're not really going to be in a position to grow. And the growth really comes from being able to answer questions and being able to speak and in the moment, right? And I think a lot of people struggle with that because you're not really able to formulate your thoughts quickly. So you're stepping out of that comfort zone. And again, it may sound repetitive, but you're building that muscle over and over again through these exercises. So I definitely see a lot of value in that piece as well.
Then finally, exercise 3, but happy to share more exercises if you want, Furkhan. Number 3 is the gratitude video message. The gratitude video message. All you have to do, take out your phone, pick somebody you love in your life, and just send them a 20-second video note saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. Hope you're having a wonderful day. And here's one thing I really appreciate about you. That's it. There's only one rule to my exercise. You are not allowed under any circumstances whatsoever to retake the video. Whatever you make is what you send. That's it. And if you do that once a day, every day, you'll be really good at sending videos, and you're also going to make people's lives a lot better. You're going to make a difference in people's lives. And people who say to me, oh, Brenden, I don't really know that many people. Here's my response. You got a LinkedIn account, right? How many connections do you have? 600? Great. Go to every single one of those 600 and send them a video message. Just go, hey, it's great to connect with you on LinkedIn. Read their profile a little bit. There's no sell. We're not selling them anything. You just go, hey, I really like that you went to this university. I like that you're working at this. If I asked you, Furkhan, in the last 30 days, how many video messages have you received from somebody on LinkedIn? If I asked you that question.
Probably not a lot. I'd say maybe 0.
Maybe 0, right? Yeah. And by the way, I'm being very conservative with my question. The right question is, Furkhan, in the history of your LinkedIn account, how many video messages have you received personalized from somebody else to you?
Yeah. 1 or 2, maybe. Yeah. But it's definitely not from a place of gratitude. It's probably trying to sell me something, which goes back to number 2. But yeah, still.
And there's nothing wrong with that. I do that all the time, and I make a bunch of money sending personalized LinkedIn video messages. But the message, the point is, if you just open your LinkedIn and you just go up, you look at profiles, because it's a professional setting, right? It's normal that you're connected with people on LinkedIn. It's people are scared. That's really the point. And it's like directly in the app. It's really easy to send a video and you just go, hey, I'm just thinking about you. Have you had a great day? Oh my God, you're going to change so many people's lives just by you sending that. Because a lot of people are having a bad day. There's so many times I've sent video messages to people just for fun. And they would go, wow, thank you so much. Like, I was actually having a rough day and I'm glad you sent this to me. Yes. And some of them became clients. But the most important part is that all of them were really happy to have me in their network. I think that's the most important thing.
For sure. And I do agree with you. There's not enough of that. But again, from the practical standpoint, what I appreciate you sharing is no retakes. You just put yourself on the spot and you do it. And again, you're practicing something, but then there's the positivity around also helping someone or making their day better, as you touched on. Anything else you would add in that third piece in terms of what is the benefit for the individual who's doing the video?
Yeah, absolutely, Furkhan. The benefit's pretty obvious. You see yourself getting better very quickly. Because the first video is just really, it's like super awkward. It's, really. But once you get to your 100th video, you're like, hey, Furkhan, I hope you're doing well, man. Hey, I just want to send you a quick video message. I'm really grateful for everything that you've done. And it's the same transformation you went through when you compare your first podcast interview with the podcast intro you have now? Like if I asked you back the question, which is the one you asked me, because I think it's better to hear it from you than from me. Furkhan, you've done probably, because I know you have a big show, you've probably done like hundreds of podcast interviews now.
Yeah.
So what have been the benefits to you for doing hundreds of podcast interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely improved my ability to think on the spot, answer your question here too, and also listen. I think that's the biggest thing I've taken out of it is how can I be present and listen to what my guest is sharing and be more in tune with myself to be able to see what's coming up for me so I can ask a valuable question that continues that conversation that's engaging. And then I think just being able to have these conversations in a natural way, which is something I definitely struggled with in the beginning. They were a lot more awkward. There was a lot of ha's and hums and trying to figure out how to guide discussion. So definitely I've noticed a huge difference over the 200 plus episodes that I've done.
Absolutely, Furkhan. And I think that's a great, thanks for sharing that, by the way. And then bringing it back to the audience, of course, most of you listening to this, you might not have the balls that Furkhan has to start a podcast, and I totally get it. So what's the in-between is the video messages. Just send video messages to people. It's private. You don't have to post anything on social media. And if you're really scared, send one to yourself every day. And it's just the prompt changes from what do you appreciate about other people to what's something you really love about yourself. And you just do that every single day. But either way, it's impossible that you don't get better at communication. If you do this 100 times, impossible to not get better.
Yeah, and maybe I'll piggyback on that too. I think to your point, if you're worried about sending it to someone else, another prompt that's really easy that I teach my clients also and help them with is just list 3 things you're grateful for, right? And maybe record that on a video rather than writing it down or typing it in. Record it as a video, and that is also a positive thing because it's helping you to identify things that you need to be grateful for, which has other positive benefits down the line. There's different ways of doing it is the point here.
100%.
Yeah. So there are some things. So obviously one of the things I came across a stat a while ago that most people are scared of public speaking over death. So we've talked about why. And then the other piece you touched on, and I do want to dive into it a little bit more because I think it could be helpful from a communication standpoint. You mentioned earlier when you're doing public speaking, you're juggling 18 balls. Now, there's stats out there, but between 80 to 95% of our communication is nonverbal. So how you focus on some of those nonverbal cues, whether, like you said, it's your body language, it's your facial expressions, it's the tone of your voice. So majority of the time, people aren't listening to the words you're saying. They're watching you, or they're just listening to the tone of your voice to gauge what you're saying or what kind of emotions you're displaying. I see this a lot in the anger management space when I'm working with clients, is to be like, okay, focus on those things, because you may say I'm not saying something hurtful, but it's all the other nonverbal cues that are making the other person feel like you're angry or just being hurtful. What are your thoughts around the nonverbal side?
Yeah, you nailed it on the head, Furkhan. I agree, right? Nonverbal is just as important, if not more important than verbal, because it communicates what we're trying to share indirectly, right? Through our facials. Like it's like if when somebody our significant comes up to us and we're like, "How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine." That communicates a different emotion, right, than what we think. Because if we just take the literal communication, then it's just, oh, that person's doing well, they're having a great day. But if they go, "Oh, I'm fine," then you know that they're probably not fine because of their vocals. The way that I think about it, Furkhan, to make a long story short, is to focus on one ball at a time. I feel if we get too caught up in all of the different areas of nonverbal, it gets really overwhelming for people. So really, I would say the main advice I have for folks out there is, have you already booked time in your calendar this week? And then people are like, to do what? I was like, to do the random word exercise, to do the question drill, and to do the video message. Every time somebody comes on you have me on a podcast or something, they always, "Oh my God, it's so great, Furkhan. You brought this Brenden guy on. He's so cool. He's so smart. He's bringing all these exercises." Cool. What are you doing with these exercises? I've yet to meet one human being in my career, one, unless they're paying a bunch of money for it. So hopefully somebody in this podcast will be the first one, because that's what I want. I have enough clients. I need people to like do the exercises. Where I've yet to meet somebody who's DM'd me on Instagram and LinkedIn and said, "Hey, Brent, I really loved your show with Furkhan. I did 100 random word exercises, 100 question drills, and 100 video messages. What should I do next?" Nobody has texted me that. Nobody. Not one person. Probably out of 500 interviews, I've probably maybe 1.2 million people have seen me on a show. Not one of those 1.2 million people has texted me saying that, "Hey, I did the work. What do I do next?" And that's what we miss. Because if we don't do that work to do the random word exercise, to the question drill, the video mess, you ain't gonna master nonverbal anytime soon. 100%. There's no way, because there's so many things you have to focus on. Hey, you got to smile. Hey, if you talk to people and you're not smiling, but you're saying you're fine, you're communicating a different emotion on your face. Hey, by the way, if you're not looking into people's eyes when you're talking, you feel really awkward to people. Hey, by the way, if you speak really fast or with a too high of a vocal tone, you're communicating indirectly that you're mad with somebody. You got to change that. The person's just not going to change any of these things if they're not going to do the easy stuff first. And that's why the third part of my differentiation is really sequencing. That's really the key that I brought to the industry. And it's a key I wish people followed. To the point, Furkhan, by the way, this is me ranting a little bit since we're having fun. That's why I had to change my free events. I'd even just do it to make more money, even if it's made me more money subsequently. I've changed it from free webinars to challenges, where now I run like multi-day free events to force people to take action. Because I used to run straight shot webinars and people would go, "Oh my God, the random word exercise is so cool." And I'd be like, "Cool, how many times have you done the exercise?" They're like, "I haven't done it yet." I'm like, Jesus Christ. So that's the key.
Yeah. So I do want to come back to the sequencing part, but what I'm hearing from you, and I see this a lot with people in general, even in the therapy space, is if you try to go after something too big, if you try to bite off too much at once, you're not really going to make any progress because you're going to get overwhelmed. So to your point, focus on that one thing, really master it, be consistent with it. And then naturally, as you're working through it, you're going to start adding different tools, right? Like let's take this podcast thing as an example again, right? Initially, I just did audio episodes, and then it slowly started building on that, right? Okay, what's the next thing I can add? I don't want to try to do too much at once or I'll get overwhelmed. Okay, let's maybe focus on transcriptions. Let's focus on sponsorships. Let's focus on video episodes. It's all eventually built itself upon each other once I mastered the first thing, which was let's just record an episode. Let's get my calendar all sorted out. Let me just make sure I'm like talking to the right people. Just focusing on that one little thing allowed me to then build on it. So that's what I'm hearing from you too when it comes to communication is don't try to do too much. Just focus on that one thing and improve on that. And then see how you can add other things. And they'll often complement each other too. Then it's easier to build on those things.
I mean, Furkhan, you hit it on the nail. And I'll literally give a funny example people can relate to. This very interview. I've been delaying this interview for almost a year, I think. And I still could have made an excuse because look at my freaking background. It's like the ugliest thing you've ever seen in your life. There's styrofoam here because there's a bunch of mold in my basement. We finally got time to clean it now that I've made a good amount of money this year. So we're fixing the basement. I could have said, because I had so many meetings in between, right, with coaching clients and stuff. So I was like, oh, should I go like a better background? Oh, maybe I can delay this episode for 6 more months until Furkhan, oh, my basement's being renovated. Give me. Or I could have just said, dude, let me just take the action. Like, how long am I going to delay this? I might be like in Bali somewhere next year and like the time zones won't work. Let me just say yes and get this done. I don't care what my basement looks like. So that is an example of how even today, even if my social media assets look amazing, I'm still that same person who takes action even 7 years later, 8 years later. And that's really a behavior I hope more people inculcate, not just in communication, but really in their life.
Yeah. And does that kind of encapsulate the whole sequencing part from your view? Is there more to it that we haven't really touched on?
Exceptional question, Furkhan. I really appreciate you asking that. You're actually really making me think. No one's asked me that question. I would say definitely 80% of it is really that, which is focusing one thing at a time. But the other 20% that I'll add is two other things. One is the sequencing is what creates the momentum. So sequencing equals momentum. Because we're focusing on one thing at a time, what I've seen, which is the other thing I'll add, what I've seen working with people privately is I don't care how introverted they are.
Mm.
If you get them to do the random word exercise, what starts to happen is this domino effect of momentum where they go, I can't do this random word exercise. And then 3 weeks later, they did 100. And I said, weren't you the guy who said 3 weeks ago you couldn't do one? And then they go, oh. And then I go, what else is possible with your communication skills? And I'm like, I think I could try the question. Then they do 100 of that. And I go, cool, how do you feel now? You're like, cool. Video messages are like, I'm not sending a video message. I was like, cool, send me one. I'm the first one. Then send that person one. Then send 100. And then at some point, the student goes, and then I go, what's possible? And they go, anything is possible. And that's when you know the limiting belief is broken.
Right.
So I think the last part of sequencing, which I need to develop more thought leadership on, so I'm glad you asked the question, is really how sequencing begets momentum. That momentum opens possibility for their life, and that possibility then makes them more exceptional at communication and any other skill in them. That's why I call a lot of my front end program is called Communication Accelerator, but in the back end I call it Possibilities Accelerator. Because what you're actually doing through that sequencing is you're unlocking different possibilities for your life you didn't see before. You don't have a girlfriend, you ask a girl on a date, you get her number, you're like, oh my God, I think I can get a girlfriend. Wait a second, I think I can get married and have kids. That's momentum. Oh, I don't think I can lose any weight. You lose 2 pounds after a week of working with a coach or going to a gym, and you're like, holy shit, I can do this. Communication, I can never do the random word exercise. You do 5 random word exercises. I think I could be a TED Talk speaker. I think I could be a keynoter. I think I could get paid $15,000 to give a keynote. This jump happens very quick, a lot faster than people think.
For sure. Yeah. I think I agree with you. And I think it's ultimately, you got to start somewhere and you got to find the topics that interest you. But again, stepping into that discomfort is where that growth really happens. And I think we've touched on that many times. So it's worth reinforcing. But Brenden, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on here, sharing so much with us, and really appreciate your time. But for listeners that want to learn more about your work, if they want to find you online or maybe even get a hold of you, what are some ways they can do that?
Absolutely, Furkhan. This was a very intellectually stimulating show. Thanks for having me and really asking me the tougher questions that I wish more people asked me to help me become better. So I appreciate it. Yeah, easiest way to keep in touch is just Instagram. Just go to Master Your Talk. That's YOUR, Master Your Talk. Just send me a DM on Instagram and just let me know that you listen to the show.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe tell them, maybe a call out for the listeners, tell them that you did the random word exercise, right? That might be a bonus.
Yeah. You could say you did it once. I'll be happy with that.
All right. Awesome. Thanks again, Brenden. This was a pleasure and an honor to have you on the show.
Honor was absolutely mine. Thanks, Furkhan.